Hi, I'm Peter Alden on behalf of the Concord Land Conservation Trust. I'm here with Lainey Widener, our wonderful new executive director and a champion botanist. This afternoon, or today, or whenever you're watching this, we're going to be introducing you to some of the highlights of fall bird migration here in the Concord area, with some of our illustrations and some comments on their status and a few of the interesting birds that we see here in the fall. So do keep in touch with the Land Trust. We have some sort of a Zoom meeting, apparently, an annual meeting, and various programs. Check the website, concordland.org. Send in your membership donations, and look forward to a number of events we have coming up, and we may get back into live events fairly shortly. So anyways, I'm Peter, and this is Lainey, and we're going to introduce some of our birds of the air, some of the birds that will be in your backyard this fall, some of the birds that you might see in the woodland, and ending up with some of the birds that you might see canoeing or just walking around wetlands, lakes, and rivers here in wonderful Concord. So let's get started. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go through some of our birds of the fall. Some of them are year-round residents, but we'll highlight a few things that go through some extraordinary migrations. And what's happening here in Concord. Our biggest news this summer has been bald eagles breeding in Concord for the first time, and I'm pleased to say that my friend Dave Witherby, who lives in Conantum, and he and his lady friend found the first nest in Concord. There is a big dark baby that's left the nest. It's hanging around in a white pine as of a few days ago on the edge of the Sudbury River and getting ready to harass fish the rest of its life. So we're very pleased to have bald eagles returning as a nesting bird, or maybe for the first time ever, in Concord. During the fall migration, there are some hawks that you don't see too often, but are very common in places like Mount Wachusett and Mount Tom, and even over here in Concord. And the best hawk migration place in the area is actually Round Hill in Sudbury, on the east side of Sudbury, about a mile east of Lincoln Sudbury High School. And that's where a bird called the broad-winged hawk. And it sort of doesn't sit around in the open too much, but it's pretty common here in the summertime, but within the forest. And the broad-winged hawks get together in the thousands, and sometimes you'll see thousands going over on days when the wind is out of the north, particularly over Mount Wachusett, Mount Tom, and smaller numbers at Round Hill. The broad-winged hawk goes over land through Texas, Veracruz, Mexico, over the Panama Canal, and then winters in Central America and around the Andes in South America. And every year it comes back to Concord, Massachusetts, over land, because these hawks do not like going over ocean waters because of the lack of thermals that they can use. That's the broad-winged hawk. Falcon that we sometimes see here, increasing numbers, the fastest bird in the world, the Peregrine Falcon, can sometimes be seen flying over some open areas, not so much forest, but open areas. The Peregrine Falcon, which dives at 200 miles an hour, and it's nesting at a site in Woburn right now, in a quarry, and various bridges and buildings in our cities here in Massachusetts. The ring-billed gull is actually the common gull inland these days, not the herring gull. It's a small gull that's been breeding in huge numbers in Lake Ontario, Lake Champlain, and will soon be nesting here in Massachusetts, a little smaller than the herring gull. There's another bird that comes through here in the first half of September, headed south. It's getting less and less common. It's called the common nighthawk. Common nighthawk's related to the whippoorwill, and these are birds that are called nightjars. And this one, the common nighthawk, has a big white band out on the primaries as they go south at sunset. And there are many people counting nighthawks as they go south. It used to be a common bird over our ballparks and towns, but it's getting scarcer, unfortunately. And the last of the chimney swifts, these little cigar-shaped birds that look sort of like swallows, but are not related to swallows. And these are birds that sleep on the wing most of the year. So after they nest up here in Concord, and they're getting a little commoner in town, which is nice, they also fly down over Panama, over the Andes, and winter exclusively in the western Amazon, which is very nice. And they sometimes congregate in hundreds at the big chimney at Damon Mill on their migration. You'll see them over Great Meadows and places like that. And also you will start seeing flocks of an invasive alien bird called the European starling. And they'll get together in ever larger flocks, going from fruiting tree to fruiting tree, and various invasive alien plants in the fall here in Concord, European starling. The last of the ruby-throated hummingbirds are breeding here in Concord. We'll be headed south through Central America during the month of September. A few of them may hang on until October, but maybe you should put away your hummingbird feeders around the 1st of October, because some hummingbirds may get addicted to it, decide not to migrate, and they're probably not going to do too well during the winter time. Another bird we might see around your home would be the flicker. A flicker is a woodpecker with big spots below, yellow under the wing, white rump, very special bird, often feeding on the ground, and was the bird that got Roger Tory Peterson started in both art and in bird identification and writing of field guides. Nice to hear all these sounds back here again. Also in the fall we start seeing more and more flocks of American robins. They start spending more of their time looking for fruit of various kinds, some of it good, some of it bad, because they spread a lot of it. And the American robins will be coming around in big flocks, especially in apple orchards. A pleasant little bird now that we have fruit. Remember, there's very little fruit available in late winter and spring, so it's pretty tough on a bird called the Cedar Wax Wing. The Cedar Wax Wing has a little laid-back crest, very gentle bird, usually in flocks, and they will be coming around and spreading the fruits of the burning bush, the European trees like glossy buckthorn, Asian vines like the Oriental bittersweet. The cedar waxwing, the robins, the bluebirds, and the starlings, and the mockingbirds are what are spreading many of these fruiting invasive plants. A common warbler in the fall is one we used to call the Myrtle Warbler, and it's been lumped with another bird out west and is now called the yellow-rumped warbler. So by mid-September on and through October, most of our other warblers have gone south, but you may be seeing the yellow-rumped warbler, which we sometimes nickname the butterbutt. It's got various plumages and browns and stripes and spots and stuff, but it's the butterbutt. There's a number of other warblers that you could see in your yard during fall migration days, and one of them is the black-throated blue warbler that might be seen in shrubbery around your house for a few days in September. Also, you'll be seeing grackles coming through here. Grackles are blackbirds with yellow eyes and a long tail, and then there's others here that we may see we'll get to in a second. And finally, it's time to start thinking about your winter bird feeding. Some people feed birds during the summer, but many people just start up sometime around Columbus Day and putting out things like thistle seed for the goldfinches, and the male goldfinches are still yellow well into the fall before they lose their beautiful colors. And finally, as far as household and backyard birds, is the white-throated sparrow that in the summertime, many of you have climbed mountains in northern New England, have heard the old Sam Peabody, 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 the white-throated sparrow. And some of our winter birds will start coming back in October, at least November, and occasionally they give a sort of a shadow version of their springtime or summertime songs, the white-throated sparrow. As far as game birds goes, you know, we've had a major change in game birds here in the Concord area over the last few hundred years. Remember, wild turkeys were gone from Massachusetts from the early 1800s until, maybe the 1960s, when Mass Wildlife brought them back in a very good move, and they've now spread throughout New England, a bird that Henry Thoreau never saw and is now our commonest game bird. Now, we used to have a bird called the ruffed grouse. Ruffed grouse was a permanent resident here, very common, known as a partridge, and we used to see them in the wintertime around orchards, and we used to have like 30, 40 of them on the Christmas bird counts. We have not had a ruffed grouse on the Concord Christmas bird count or in any of the neighboring towns now for somewhere like a dozen years. And it may be due to habitat. Maybe there's too many carnivores around here right now. Because remember, carnivores have exploded. And another game bird that was very common here in the 1900s up through the 1970s, and we all heard them and we all saw them, was the ring-necked race of the pheasant from China. And they were everywhere. Very common bird. They'd walk across roads, be on our front lawns, and they have all completely vanished. We have not had a wild pheasant in Concord for perhaps 20 years. They're occasionally brought out for shooting by various game and sportsmen's clubs, but it is gone, and it may partly be due to several factors: an introduced disease that came in with some chickens and passed on to pheasants, but it's a huge increase in coyotes and foxes and fishers and opossums and raccoons, as we don't really trap anything anymore, and all these carnivores have come out and they've got great senses of smell. Now the turkeys roost in trees at night, so they're not really subject to much predation at night, but we think pheasants sitting on eggs or young are probably been harassed and sort of overcome by too many carnivores. Our owls are going to start calling again. They're the first thing to breed in the wintertime. Many of them start in like February or even late January. Some of them, like the great horned owl, our largest owl that specializes on mammals and killing skunks, and they will take a few feral cats, which us bird watchers are not too sorry about unless it's a cat that you love. But the great horned owls are pretty common. There's probably 20 pairs in Concord right now. A smaller owl with a rounded head and has dark eyes, not yellow eyes, is the barred owl. And the barred owl is mainly a wooded swamp bird, and it has that call that who cooks for you all. And you may be hearing them. They occasionally feed in the daytime and sometimes sing in the daytime. Our smallest of our common owls is the Screech Owl, or eastern Screech Owl, and it's interesting that it occurs in a reddish-orange phase or a gray phase. It has nothing to do with whether it's a male or a female, or old or young. It just happens. Some turn out red and some turn out gray. A nice little bird, the Screech Owl, near the northern limit of its range. When you go north of the White Mountains, no Screech Owls. As you walk through the woods, you sometimes will see, even in your yard with certain kinds of trees, with the rose family and the birches and other kinds of trees, you'll see rows, horizontal rows that some woodpecker has made. And that is the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And it's a bird that sort of pecks into the bark of certain smooth-barked trees, like beeches and whatever. And then the sap comes out there. And then the yellow-bellied sapsucker comes back an hour or two later, or days later, and feeds on the sap, which is like sugar buzz, but also any insects that are also attracted to the little sap that is dribbling out of these woodpecker holes made by the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Doesn't nest in Concord, but we do have them in migration in the fall, and a few of them winter here. Now, a few pileated woodpeckers will be seen in the fall if you walk around in the woods. That's that great big crow-sized woodpecker with a big, long, flaming red crest. It looks like the mythical ivory-billed woodpecker. And we now have about a dozen pairs of those in Concord, which is very nice to see. A bird that Henry Thoreau never saw. Blue jays are sort of quiet in the summertime when they have babies, but in the fall they get pretty loud. And depending on where acorns are doing well, they will be moving through in big numbers. And the blue jays we have here in the summer may not be the same blue jays we have in the winter, and because we will see big migrations of them moving away from areas that have not had many acorns in one year, going to a place or hoping to find a place where there's been a big lot of acorns dropping on the ground or hanging on the trees. Now, we mostly know the upside-down bird known as the white-breasted nuthatch. And the white-breasted nuthatch actually has a cousin that we see here in the fall. Most years it's eruptive. Some years we have a lot, some years we don't. And it's known as the red-breasted nuthatch. And it has a sort of a little trumpet-like call rather than the yank-yank of the white-breasted nuthatch. It has a toot-toot-toot-toot-toot-toot thing, mainly in pines. Not so much the white pines, but other kinds of conifers and red pines. And it has a bright reddish-orange breast and an extra black line through the eye, the red-breasted nuthatch. Now, most of our warblers disappear for the winter time. Our common warbler here in the woodlands is the pine warbler. It's quite yellow below and has a song that sounds like a chipping sparrow, but a little more musical. A few of them actually winter here. But the main thing that we have here, and you have to have binoculars to know it, is a bird known as the black pole warbler. It's a late spring migrant, and the males are black and white in late May when they head north up into the boreal forest, all the way up to Alaska, even a few of them into Siberia. And they all come east from wherever they are, west of Hudson's Bay or Quebec or the northern mountains of New England, and they flood into New England. Now, most all the other warblers that are headed to Latin America for the winter, they stay on land. They head down to the southeastern United States, a few of them into the West Indies. Most of them fly around Texas or over the Gulf of Mexico, headed to Central America and South America. But there's one that's different. It's known as the black-pole warbler, a very common bird up in the boreal forest, but it doesn't show up in Georgia or Louisiana or Florida in the wintertime. And it was a mystery, because all the other warblers are trying to avoid the ocean and go by land down to their wintering grounds. But the black-polled warbler just doesn't show up south of Cape Hatteras. So what's happening? People at Mass Audubon, I used to work with, James Baird and others, postulated that maybe it doesn't go down over land, but fattens up. So here in New England, the black-polled warblers, and there's hundreds here in September, they're fattening up on caterpillars and whatever insects they can find, and they add 50% to their body weight. But instead of going over land down through Louisiana and Texas and headed down to Central America, instead they wait for a northwest wind, and they have added 50% to their body weight. Now the fat that birds build up unconsciously in August and September for long-distance migration breaks down into two things: energy to support your flight south, and water. So the black-polled warbler turns out to be a fairly regular migrant over Bermuda, and it only stops there when there's a headwind or hurricane or something like that. And we've now, through radar and other things, found out that the black-polled warblers fattens up in New England, and they fly non-stop to eastern Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, places like that, and winters in the northern Amazon area. And they just do a 5-day flight, and most of these North American songbirds, they fly by the day and then they rest during the night. But the black-polled flies 24 hours a day, and with banding records, they can make it to South America from Concord, Mass. in about 5 days, flying 24 hours a day non-stop. And if they do happen to go over Bermuda, the northwest winds blow them out towards Bermuda, and then the trade winds send them with wind at their back to South America. 5 days to South America on a bird with a brain the size of a pea, and it doesn't get lost. That's the black-polled warbler. There's another bird we might see in swamps here, like the Punkatasset and places like that, is the rusty blackbird. It's like a grackle with a shorter tail, also has a yellow eye, and the immatures are sort of brown and speckly, but it's a fall migrant that is special. As far as our water birds go, you know, we have the ubiquitous Canada goose, and the Canada geese still come south in V's high in the sky. The ones you're seeing flying low over the trees, just a couple of tree lengths up, those are resident birds. It'll move down to the Cape if it gets a really bad winter with heavy snows. But we still get some from Canada coming south, headed down over here, mixing with the local birds. But those migrants from Canada are headed down to the Chesapeake and North Carolina. Our common duck here is the mallard. We'll see the beautiful males, but the females have two white patches on the purple speculum at the base of their wing, the mallards. We used to have another duck here called the black duck, and we still get a few in the wintertime, but they may not be breeding here any longer. The American black duck looks like a female mallard, but much darker, with a full yellow bill. Our wood ducks are here. They don't really winter, but you may be seeing the male wood duck, our most beautiful duck by far, that breeds in all those boxes you see at Great Meadows and along the Sudbury River. Now, there are some smaller ducks that we see in the fall. Now, Great Meadows is suffering right now from two factors. One is the invasive alien American lotus from the Midwest, which is not native to Massachusetts, which is just dominating most of the marsh. So we don't have the ducks there that we used to have because there isn't the food, the wild rice and other things, and a whole variety of other marsh plants that we used to have there. Now, we've suffered at Great Meadows, first with purple loosestrife. We brought in a bunch of beetles that did knock it back somewhat. Then we had a problem with water chestnut floating on the surface. It's been hand-pulled, machines, got rid of that. Now we have American lotus taking over the place. We really wish it was all cattails with other marsh plants. But there are some ducks you may see. The small ones are things called blue-winged teal that actually winter as far as Argentina going through. And another small, fast-flying duck called the green-winged teal, which is actually a pretty beautiful duck if you see it up close, but mainly at Great Meadows. Now, one thing that we've lost at Great Meadows, because I remember back in the 1960s, 70s, even in the 80s, Great Meadows was a staging area for a duck we used to call the bald pate for its white crown. It's now called the American widgeon. And we used to have somewhere between 500 and 1,200 American widgeons feeding and gathering at Great Meadows in late September, early October, and now it's a rare bird there. But we think it's due to the lack of food. And another problem with Great Meadows is that the carp, the great big fish, which sort of wipes out a lot of bottom plants that might have provided food for all of these ducks and other watcher birds, has pretty much taken over and sort of ruined the bottom. So Great Meadows is a shadow of what it used to be, but it's still worth walking there if you can find a parking place. With this coronavirus, many of the Concord Land Trust properties, Great Meadows, and the bike trail are getting really huge use, and we're glad to see people outdoors. But it can be a problem finding a parking space there at the Great Meadows Refuge in Concord. The midweek's probably better than the weekend, because it's really getting full. Another beautiful bird that we sometimes see, and they do use those wood duck boxes, but if you have binoculars or telescope, both in the rivers here in Concord and our lakes, you may see a bird called the hooded merganser, which is a fish-eating duck with a saw-like bill to hold on to the slippery fish. At Walden Pond, as those of you who did watch our sort of spring or summer birds episode earlier with the Land Trust, we have common loons that have been hanging around, a pair of common loons, looks like a male-female and full adults, hanging around at Walden Pond, and they've also been seen at Farrah Pond and Sandy Pond, and perhaps they're nesting or thinking of nesting if they can find an island to nest on, because raccoons will come in at night and eat the eggs of the young babies. And the loon does not walk very fast. It's related to penguins, actually. But it looks like there's enough food here for them. They want to be here, but there's no island at Walden, and I've been unsuccessful with the staff at Walden, and I do work at the shop at Walden Pond 3 days a week, to put up an artificial island in Walden Pond, which I would like to see happen, but they say there's just too much pressure from the swimmers and the fishermen to block off part of Walden for the summertime. But that doesn't mean some other lakes might be okay for it, and this has turned out to be true. When you build an artificial island that floats, and you put in some rocks and ferns and a shrub and stuff like that, so the loons feel safe from raccoon and perhaps fisher predation or coyote predation at night, they will nest, and we'd love to have nesting loons. And these loons have been singing their haunting calls at dawn and dusk at Walden. Even if they're not nesting there, they are feeding there. And I am here in West Concord at the moment, overlooking some woodland that we'd love to save next to the rail trail. And I actually had a common loon flying over my house. It's a yard bird this year for the first time. Never expected to see a loon from my yard. So they're looking around here. They feel comfortable here. And they are nesting out at the Quabbin Reservoir, Wachusett. And we want to see if we can figure out a way and find a floating island site at one of our ponds here in Concord to hopefully have loons here. So most of the people that do visit Walden Pond, and there's a lot of publicity about in a movie that they show, with the calls of the loons that Henry did hear, perhaps in migration, but particularly up north in the Maine woods. But people go out and they report to me at this shop, oh, we saw a loon out there, and the loon is not black. What they're seeing is double-crested cormorants that breed out in the Harbor Islands in Boston, and then they do fly in as far as Walden to feed. We sometimes have 2 or 3 of them there, and of course you do see them drying their wings when they can. But most of the people who claim to have seen a loon are seeing double-crested cormorants. Great blue herons are still here. We've lost that big colony below White Pond, but we have a few very small colonies here and there in Concord. And as you canoe along the Sudbury River or the Assabet, you will be seeing some great blue herons. Not in the numbers we had before, but they're still pretty common, and it's a great sight to see. And amateurs will, of course, just call it a crane. It's not a crane. Also in the fall, a lot of water birds that breed down in Florida and the Gulf Coast or southeastern U.S. Sort of have a push northward some years in numbers. So occasionally we will see some of the white egrets that may still nest in a few islands off the coast of Massachusetts, but some of them do come in from the south. We have the great egret, a big one the size of a great blue heron with a yellow beak. And I had 2 of them flying here over my place in West Concord a while back this spring. But we see them, and also the black beak of the snowy egret. We sometimes see them, particularly at Great Meadows. This year, for the first time, we've had an incursion of yellow-crowned night herons, a bird of the southeastern U.S., and there's now dozens showing up in Massachusetts. You're unlikely to see it, but this is the year you might, as you go along a waterway, see some heron you don't know, and that might be the yellow-crowned night heron. There's an invasion of them this year. There's perhaps 100 in Massachusetts suddenly. We no longer have breeding Marsh Hawks, or what we now call northern harriers. They're a long-winged, long-tailed, with white rump in all phases, that flies low over marshes. You'll never see them sitting high in a tree, and they don't tend to fly high except occasionally in migration. But at Great Meadows, maybe somewhere around Niagara Corner, you might see the thing we used to call the Marsh Hawk, or northern area, but mainly just in migration at the moment. At Great Meadows itself, if you walk on the main dike or do the loop trail, you may see something down in the cattails that are remaining, known as the Virginia rail, with a long beak, and they used to breed here in big numbers. There's still a few that breed here, but you might see them in migration. There's more here in the fall than there is in the summertime, the Virginia rail, and it has a sister species with a yellow beak called the Sora. And you'll see a few sandpipers, particularly as the water level has been dropping at Great Meadows. So some of these sandpipers that breed in the high Canadian Arctic and Alaska will come through and stop. Particularly the least sandpiper will be the tiny little one with yellowish legs. And it has a sister species called semi-palmated sandpiper, and they gather in big flocks, mainly on the mud flats, Newburyport Harbor and parts of the Cape. And they also fly nonstop. Once they fatten up here on all the little invertebrates in the mud flats, at Great Meadows in a few cases, but particularly the coast, they will fly nonstop to the Guianas, just take off over the ocean and head to South America. And again, with bands, we can put a band on some of these, and we get very few returns, but when we do, it's very cool. But we do remember banding a semi-palmated sandpiper in Cape Cod at one point, and that band was shot, or a bird was shot down in the Suriname, I believe, like 5 days later, proving how fast these birds will go. A larger sandpiper we might see at Great Meadows and a few other spots is the greater yellowlegs, which has a loud choo-choo-choo and a fairly long beak, the greater yellowlegs. And finally, we will be seeing flocks of blackbirds. If you see a flock of thousands and thousands of blackbirds in sort of a line that are talking when they stop, that is the common grackle with the yellow eye and the longer tail. But other flocks of the red-winged blackbirds, a very common breeding bird around here, will get together in the fall here and there, and they're not starlings. They have a longer tail than a starling, longer wings, and the starling, of course, has a very pointed little narrow wing, whereas the red-wing has sort of a fingered wingtip, more like a hawk, and they're quite common. And the red-winged blackbirds will be leaving here. We don't tend to get them on the Christmas bird counts, but they will be the sign of spring. So as we say goodbye to many of our birds in the fall that are headed to warmer climes for the winter, say goodbye to the red-winged blackbirds, because in the spring, in late February, we look forward to the conqueree of the male red-winged blackbirds fighting other red-winged blackbirds in the springtime, and that's our sign of spring, along with skunk cabbage in the botanical world. And it's no longer the robins and the bluebirds, because they're staying here in the thousands eating horticultural fruits and invasive alien fruits. So anyways, enjoy your fall birding. There's a number of interesting things to see. We couldn't cover all of the species, but it's an interesting time of year, and we hope you do get out on the properties of the Concord Land Conservation Trust and other town properties, federal properties, state properties, and enjoy your life. Bring your binoculars and get out there, and remember to support the Concord Land Conservation Trust. Thank you.